members of the 5th District team who have been hard at work helping to prepare for this meeting and in general responding to hopefully every possible request that comes our way from you into our office, including we had flooding in Giovanetti Road, we had a big slide on Eagles Nest Lane, we've had a lot of storm recovery over the past week. And so I want to give a huge shout out to Lupe Catalan, who just provided the Spanish language introduction. She is one of our field representatives. And she has been critical in helping Sycamore Court residents down there who were impacted by the flooding over the weekend recover in partnership with some of our local nonprofits like Russian River Alliance. Debbie Ramirez, who's another one of our awesome field representatives and point person for our Lower Russian River Municipal Advisory Council. Tracy Lyons, our awesome chief of staff, and also Kermit Finola, wrangler and chief. And Shay is our newest team member, and we're super excited to have him work with us. Not only is he a local West County farmer rancher, he also is going to be the one who's going to take our infrastructure projects and community-based projects into the forefront. All right, so that's enough about us, because this meeting is really about all of you. While this meeting represents the conclusion of the process, wherein Blue Sky had community town halls, took community surveys, met with stakeholder groups to come up with a suite of options of how to address better governance in the Lower Russian River. This is sort of their last meeting with us, but this is really the start of a different process, which is, what do you all want to do? We have no preconceived outcome for this. We didn't when we started, and we actually still don't. What we want to do is listen to the community. I think that in this room, you will find that everyone here wants safer streets. They want better streets with fewer potholes and more sidewalks and more bike lanes, right? They want better health and human services. They want easier permitting processes. They want to feel more empowered, not disempowered when it comes to governance and what happens in their community. And yet, in this room, we have people who believe that the only way to get there is incorporation. We have people who think that incorporation is crazy. And we have folks in between who are just trying to figure out, hey, what do we think the best possible outcome could be? I want you to know that, again, there is no preconceived outcome. And we are here to work with whatever groups form out of this process. If you get a bunch of neighbors together and you want to explore incorporation, or you want to explore a council of governments, or you want to explore a community services district, our 5th District team is here to meet with you and to support those processes and to carry it forward. But we are not here to push our solutions on you. We are not here to say, all right, now we've got a report and we're just going to put it on a shelf and pretend that none of it ever happened, right? We're here to listen to you. We're here to work with you into the future. And so I just want you to know that the future of the Lower Russian River is truly in your hands, and we want to be your partners on what the next steps are. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the official PowerPoint presentation. Thank you all. It is so beautiful to stand here and see so many folks out on a Saturday morning. And I also want to acknowledge that there are some folks who are at work today, and that we are also happy to meet with them and hear from them, because obviously weekends are always a busy thing for small business owners in the Lower Russian River.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Newman, as Linda just said, and I am part of the Blue Sky Consulting Group. Do you all hear me? Is this working okay?
I think it'd be closer. You kind of have to eat it to hold it.
Okay. There we go. All right. I'm Matt Newman. I am with the Blue Sky Consulting Group, and we are a public policy analysis consulting firm based down in Oakland, and we've had the privilege of working with this community for the last year or so on this governance study. So thank you all for coming out today to be part of this meeting. Today, what we'd like to do is talk a little bit about kind of what the governance solutions are, talk a little bit about the process that we've gone through, and then really the purpose here is to give a chance for all of you to ask questions of me if I can answer them, of other members of the team, of Supervisor Hopkins, so that we can provide you with all the information you need to go ahead and do whatever makes sense for this community going forward. So just to kind of remind people of where this all came from, Supervisor Hopkins heard from all of you that there was an interest in better governance, and so she worked with the board to get some money to hire our team to collect information and do some financial analysis to try to help all of you. And so the process started with my team doing some interviews with community leaders. We had a meeting in this room about a year ago where we heard from over 100 of you about what the most important needs in the community were. We did a little online survey where people had a chance to provide input, and we heard about a lot of issues that are of concern to this community, and we tried to kind of synthesize those, and from all the list of issues that we heard, we tried to develop a suite of governance options. You know, what are the solutions to all of the problems that we were hearing about from the community? So after we heard from you, after we developed some solutions, then we did some financial analysis to see how much revenue is generated by this region and how much money the County Board of Supervisors is spending on this region. And then we put all that together into a report, which is available on the RiverMap website. And I can help any of you who haven't seen it yet get a copy so you can read it. But that report summarizes the process that I just talked about. It presents the range of options that we developed, and then a couple of recommendations about what we think makes the most sense. But as Supervisor Hopkins said, it's really up to all of you to figure out what makes sense for this community. So that's the process we've been through. Today, again, the objective is to just hear from all of you to try to answer your questions if we can. If we can't, we'll try to follow up and provide answers to those questions. And then we'll submit our report to the county, and it will be up to all of you to govern yourselves, to go forward with whatever the next steps are to make the most sense. So just to kind of remind people who may not have been following this process as closely as some of us have, there's a range of issues that were brought up, and some of them lend themselves to a governance solution, which means create a new entity of government, a new city or a new special district. But other issues really lend themselves to a different kind of solution, and they really require a response from the county. So some services, no matter what happens, even if you were to live in the city, those services will always be provided by the county because that's the way the state is organized. And so, for example, a lot of people were concerned about mental health services or substance use services, transit, food insecurity. These are services that are critically important, but they're provided by the county, and even if this community were to incorporate or do something else, they'll always be provided by the county. And so the solution to providing better services like those is to work with Supervisor Hopkins to hope our report makes it all the way to her other colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, and to try to improve those kind of services by working with the county. And I should say that for those services, there's lots of efforts already underway, and I don't want to spend a lot of time going into those things, but all the issues that were raised through the workshop that we had and the community leader interviews that we did and the online survey were brought to the attention of Supervisor Hopkins, and she's working with many members of the community to try to address those services. And hopefully to lift up the community voice that was raised when we had the meeting earlier this year. So those are efforts that are underway. But there are many issues that are in a different bucket, and those are issues that could be helped by forming a new entity of governance, by forming a special district, by forming a city. And so that's the issues that are kind of the focus of this meeting and of this governance study. So the kind of issues that fall into this bucket of lending themselves to a governance solution are things like land use or building permits, vacation rental units, more affordable housing. These are all things that a new city could help address if you were to incorporate a reformed city. Public safety, roads and public works, parks, trash pickup, emergency services, better cell broadband service, more economic development, and water and wastewater. These are all things that a new entity of government that's not the county could help with. And so the question is, which of these are the most important, and what kind of new government would it make sense to try to form to help address these services? So within this kind of bucket of things that could be helped by a governance solution, there's a full range of options. So on the one hand, there's things that are already being done. There's existing institutions. There's the MAC that many of you know about, which is a municipal advisory council, which helps the board understand what the needs of this community are. And there's some ways to make that even more effective than it is. You could do something like form a council of governments. There's lots of local governments that are already serving this community. There are cities that serve adjacent communities. There's special districts that provide parks or fire or water or wastewater services to parts of this community. So getting all of those entities together to communicate more effectively is a way to strengthen the existing institutions that already exist in this community. You could also expand the existing special districts. There's, for example, 2 park districts that already serve this community. Maybe it would make sense to expand what those districts already do, since they're an existing entity and they already have a structure. And so there's the possibility of expanding or even consolidating existing special districts. You could also perhaps consider joining with a special district in another region and asking them to expand their service territory to include part of this region. So there's a lot of options to build on what already exists. And then there's the option of creating a brand new special district, sort of a local government of your own, if you will. That could be anything from a new district that just does park services, or a new district that does trash pickup and downtown beautification in Vernonville, to something that is a multi-service special district, something called a community services district. They would act almost like a city, and it would provide a range of services, from public safety to roads to parks to anything else that the community decided it wanted that new community services district to provide. Now, the one difference between that and the last option here on the far right, which is becoming a city, is that a city is the only entity that can do regulation of land use. So a community services district can do all those other things, including public safety and roads. It can't regulate land use, which means it can't approve building permits. It can't change a vacation rental policy. Only a city or the county can do those things. So those are the most important things. Then thinking about going all the way to municipal incorporation would make sense. So that's very quickly the range of options. In a minute, we'll get to your questions, and I'm happy to answer questions about the specifics of how all of those work. There's important differences, though, between these in terms of how much local control the community will have, in terms of how much effort it takes on behalf of the community to form one of these entities, right? That's the kind of crux of all of this, is that it's up to you, the community, to decide what you want to do and make it happen. That's not going to be done to you or for you. It's going to be done by you if it happens. So there's a range of effort, and it depends on what the appetite and willingness of this community is to do something to help make it happen. And then there's also risk, right? Local governments go bankrupt. Local governments make stupid decisions sometimes. So the creating a new government also comes with some risk, and the community will have to decide what level of risk does it want. And so these are trade-offs, right? More local control is, generally speaking, people like that, but it also comes with more effort and more risk. So that's the kind of trade-off that the community will have to think about as it decides what solutions make the most sense. So from all of this, and I should say, we did one other thing, which I don't want to go into here unless there's specific questions, but we did a lot of financial analysis as part of this project also, which is detailed in the report, but I think going over a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet in a meeting like this doesn't always work very well, but I guess I just wanted to do a quick overview of what was found. This community generates about 16 or 17 million dollars in revenue, which is collected by Sonoma County. And that's from things like property taxes and hotel taxes and sales taxes and fees that are paid to the Permit Sonoma and fees that are paid to the Parks Department and other things like that. So that's a lot of money, and that money could be used to provide services that a local government would provide, a new community services district or even a new city. We also found that the county spends maybe 12 or 13 million dollars in direct service provision in this community. So less than the 16 or 17 million on things like providing sheriff's patrols and that kind of thing.
Talk a tiny bit slower, I'm sorry.
Of course, I'm sorry. So just to back up, there's about 16 or 17 million dollars in revenue that's generated by this community. And I should say all of this is covered in the report, and I'm happy to answer questions about it too. There's about 12 or 13 million in direct service delivery. So that's things like sheriff's patrols in this community. So that sounds like, oh, well, there's a surplus there, 4 or 5 million that we're paying to the county over and above what we're getting back in services. But we also found that there's probably around $7 or $8 million in services that the county's providing that this community benefits from, which are of countywide benefit. So the county provides probation services and runs a jail and has a DA that prosecutes crimes and has a board of supervisors that pays Supervisor Hopkins' staff and their salaries. So those countywide services also cost $7 or $8 million, and that's the sort of share of service costs that this region benefits from. But the total of those is maybe 300 million, and this region, being a few percent of the county's population, benefits from about $7 million. So the conclusion of all of that is it's probably not fair to say that this region is sending a bunch of money to Santa Rosa and not getting its fair share back in services. It's paying a lot of money and it's getting a lot of services back. Now, it may be that the way that the county is spending that money is not what the community wants. And it may be that the way that money is being spent is not being spent very well or efficiently. And so the opportunity to create a new local government is really to take some of that money that the community is sending to Santa Rosa and getting control over how to spend it locally. It's not that there would be more money, because the way this would work, if something were to happen, like a new city were to be formed or a new special district were to be formed to provide a service that the county is already providing, is that the county and the proponents of the new community would get together and figure out how much the service costs, and then whatever savings the county generates by not having to provide that service anymore. Just suppose the community said, we want to do our own law enforcement. So then there'd have to be work done to figure out how much money to share the spending on doing public safety in this community. If it didn't have the sheriff's office didn't have to work here anymore, then they would have a savings, and that money would be available to this community to spend. It wouldn't be more money than is currently being spent. It'd be exactly the same amount of money, but it would be something over which there could be local control. So that's the important thing here. This isn't forming a new government, whether it's a community services district or a special district or a city, isn't by itself a way to get more money. It's a way to have more control over the money that's already being spent. Now, if the community wants more money, then it can raise taxes and collect and spend that money locally, and that's a separate issue. But just incorporating or just forming a CSD isn't a higher level of services. It's just more control over how the money is being spent. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, I think. So, given all of that, we have two recommendations that we came up with, which is just our sort of expert opinion on what makes the most sense, having done this kind of work for a lot of years and having heard from all of you. But it's not a decision. I don't get to make any decisions. That's up to all of you. But this is what we think makes the most sense. The first is just to strengthen what you have. You have good resources already. There's the Municipal Advisory Council that's already doing work, and it could be strengthened in a couple of important ways. But one of which is that you could ask, or ask Supervisor Hopkins to ask, the county to give the MAC a budget. Now, because the MAC is advisory, it can't vote to spend the money. But you could say, we want to have an allocation of money that we get to recommend how it's spent. We get to say, here's $100,000 and advise the board on how it should be spent. What are the highest priority needs in this community? And this is a thing that has happened elsewhere in the state where county boards would say to the MACs in their region, what do you guys need? You tell us, and if you propose something reasonable, we'll spend the money the way you recommend. So that is relatively easy, I say, in that it doesn't require a popular vote and it doesn't require a lot of community organizing. It requires convincing the board to do it, and it could be undone at any time. That's the concern about something like this, is next year the board might not provide an allocation. But it's something that would be pretty straightforward and easy to do, and it would allow for resources to be spent where this community thinks it's most important. The other is to form a council of governance, which I mentioned before. And this is just a way to improve coordination. Maybe one entity doesn't know that the other entity is planning to close a road, or planning to make an investment in some piece of infrastructure, that there could be some economies of scale if communities did it at the same time, or planning for disaster preparedness, or all kinds of things. And so just having the governments in the region talk to each other is basically free and makes a lot of sense and builds on what this community already has in terms of local governments that are serving it. So that's our first recommendation, is to strengthen the existing institutions and to build on what you have. The next recommendation is to form a new community services district. So that's just a fancy name for a special district that provides multiple services. It's a local government with an elected board, and it collects money and spends the money the way the board decides, presumably in accordance with the wishes of the local community. And a community services district, as I said, can do basically anything a city can do except regulate land use. But the important thing about a community services district is that the voters, when it's created, can authorize it to do essentially whatever they want, but it doesn't have to do everything right at once. So you could say, we want to create a community services district that can provide public safety services and can provide roads and can provide street lighting and landscaping and trash collection and parks, and can do all these things, but it doesn't have to on the first day it's created. It can do one thing to start with. You guys can see, you the community can see, are these guys doing a good job? Are they well managed? Are we happier now that we have this entity, or is it just an extra thing that we don't think is doing a good job? So you start with one or a smaller set of services, and then the next year, or in 5 years, you can say, wow, these guys are doing great. Let's add in roads and negotiate with the county over taking over responsibility for paying for and funding and building roads. Or let's add public safety. And so then you've got this entity that has a lot of potential, but you can use it judiciously as you move forward with this process. And then if that works, then you can say, wow, this is working. We like control. We like how this is going. The risk is manageable. Maybe we do want to become a city. And then you could have a subsequent process to convert from being a community services district to being a city. So this is a way to have a path to more local control and a path to more and better local governance, but without having to go there all at once. So from our standpoint, that is the way that would make the most sense for this community to proceed. So just to try to answer a couple of questions I think will happen, I'd like to talk a bit about the process for forming a new community services district. Like, what would that mean? What would that look like? So the first thing is, after this meeting, some number of you will have to say, this is the thing we want to do, and organize. And I think Supervisor Hopkins has suggested she might be willing to help with that, but it's really up to the community to say, we want to do this. So a group of community members gets together, they talk about it, they say, this is our plan, let's hear from more members of the community and see if this is something that has some legs. If it looks like it does, then the step after that is to identify some funding to do a couple of things. You have to draw a map. You have to say, what is this? What are the boundaries of this new district? How big is it? Is it the whole Lower Russian River? Is it just a part of it? Is it even bigger than the Lower Russian River? So where are we? What service territory are we covering? And then you also need to do some financial analysis. Now, the work that we've done will hopefully be a foundation for that and make it pretty easy and hopefully relatively inexpensive for this new district to figure out the financial picture. But some analysis will have to be done to figure out how much money will this new entity collect and how much service will the responsibility will it have? What are the costs going to be? And make sure those things are in balance. So those two things have to happen. And then you go to this entity called the LAFCO, which is the Local Agency Formation Commission. Every county has one. And the LAFCO will have to basically approve this process, say, yes, it looks like this is something that's reasonable. And it's up to them to receive an application, to look at the mapping and the financial analysis and say, yeah, this looks like it could work. There also might have to be a hearing where people can protest and say, we don't like this is a bad idea, and the LAFCO will have such a hearing if needed, and perhaps the process will end there if there's enough protest, or perhaps it'll succeed and it'll go on to the next step, which is that a negotiation will have to happen with the county. So if this community wants to say, take over responsibility for sheriff's patrols, the way to get the money for that is for the county to say, we're spending X, $6 or $7 million, and yeah, we're willing to, we agree that's the right number. You can have that money that we're currently collecting from your local property taxes and hotel taxes or whatever the source, and we're willing to give that amount to you if we don't have to provide sheriff's patrol anymore. So that negotiation happens, and the LAFCO will say, that's fair, and it looks right, and approve that. And then, if all goes well, the next step is the voters have to approve. That is, the residents of the community that will be served by this new district have to vote and say, yeah, we want this. Nothing happens unless this community votes and says we want it. So there'll be an election. At that election, there'll be probably two things on the ballot. Should we form this new entity that provides services X, Y, and Z, and have the capacity to perform these other services in the future if we wanted to? And you'll also elect the board members of the new district. It'll be your local leaders. So that'll happen at an election as this process continues. And then if the voters approve the new district and it goes forward, then the people that were elected at that election will meet and they'll form a district. And then they'll have to rent a space to hold meetings and hire a lawyer to make sure that they're obeying the law and get accounting services and report financially to the state and do a whole host of other things that a new local government will have to do, and probably hire some staff to help with that. But that's the kind of gist of the process. And it's basically the same whether it's a special district that does one thing. We want this special district to just provide park services to parts of the community that aren't in a park district, or a community services district that does a whole bunch of things, or form a new city. The process is, there's legal distinctions, but in a nutshell, the process is very similar, whichever of those things happen, and most importantly, it has the elements I mentioned, which is the community has to organize to make it happen. The voters have to approve it to make it happen, and then the elected official will be this new entity. Okay, so that was a lot of me talking and pretty fast, and I apologize for that. But at this point, I guess I'd like to answer any questions you have if I can, and I know Supervisor Hopkins is prepared to answer as well. So I think there's a mic that will be passed around, and we'll see if we can get answers.
All right, so how this is gonna work is this is definitely gonna be questions. We will have a separate opportunity for comments, but I know how y'all work, right? The question has to end with a question mark. It can't go on for 20 minutes, right? Because we wanna make sure we do have time for comment later. So we'll try to get through the questions as quickly as we can, and then I really wanna open the floor to hear from you. And I would encourage, anyone who makes similar comments to then, talk to those other folks after the meeting, formal meeting is concluded to see if there's interest in carrying forward with some kind of next. So I'll try to start on this side of the room and then I'll work my way back. So go ahead.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Also, I have cards here. If anyone wants to make a comment but they don't want to speak publicly about it, you can write it down and we'll listen to what you have to say, of course. There's also a way to provide comments on the report or send an email to us about the process. So there's lots of ways to provide your input, even if you don't feel like making a comment.
Yeah, so we can circulate with the comment cards and then we can actually read them aloud when we sort of let folks make comments after we get through the questions. All right, so I'm starting over here and then we'll make our way that direction.
Short of incorporation, how do we get law enforcement to do more law enforcement?
Sure. I mean, I think the way to do that is to tell the board and tell the sheriff, who's an independently elected official, that you don't feel like you're getting good service from your elected representatives, and ask them to do better. That's kind of how democracy works. You can vote for a new sheriff when the time comes. I guess I'll also say, I think trying to document what people are happy with. So if there's specific things are happening, and I've had to deal with this in my own community in Oakland, where we feel like the police department isn't responding to something we're upset about. So the neighbors keep a log and they call the police and they are very systematic about saying, these are the problems and we don't think these things are being addressed. So if there's very specific comments from multiple people, I think that's much more likely to be effective than this isn't good enough.
Well, I mean, we've kind of tried everything over the years, and we don't have enough votes to matter that much for the big picture for the sheriff's mission. So I'm wondering about this community service district. Is there any mechanism to create more requirements from the sheriff's department through that vehicle, or is that a no? We have to incorporate it right our own law enforcement?
No, the community services district can provide law enforcement, and so if the community votes and they want to do that, then they can say, we don't want the public safety we're getting from the county anymore. We want to do it ourselves. We want the money that you're spending, and then the community services district would create a police department, if you will, and they hire police officers and a police chief, and you'd run your own law enforcement. Now, in practice, the way this would often work, at least initially, is that communities would contract. So instead of going out and hiring your own employees, at least initially there'd be a contract. That contract might be with the sheriff, but you can specify in that contract exactly what you want. We want this number of patrols, we want response times below this certain threshold, whatever the things are that the community wants and can pay for can be negotiated in the contract. And then if the sheriff doesn't live up to the contract, you can contract with another local entity that has a police department or create your own employees. So yes, a community services district is a way to have local control over law.
And I would just add that two existing examples of that are both the town of Windsor and Sonoma currently contract with the sheriff's office. So they can have that added level of oversight of sort of dictating precisely what they want in their communities with respect to law enforcement services that are provided by the sheriff. I also want to mention, one of the things the sheriff talks a lot about is being understaffed. There are huge recruitment and retention challenges right now, which were hopefully helped by the last round of negotiations. But one conversation that I've had with the sheriff, and I could use all of your support, is trying to bring back the narcotics unit, which I believe hasn't existed maybe since the recession. I think that's when it was cut and it was never brought back. And so to try to cut off the supply of drugs, the illegal drugs that are coming in there, it's not about going after the folks who are consuming. You want to provide them with supportive services, but it could help go after the drug dealers and drug suppliers. And so if there's interest in that, maybe we could work on trying to make a budget request with the sheriff's office this upcoming June during budget hearings.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. If we move forward with a community services district, you brought up items that we cannot address in that. Land use, policy planning around that, adjusting our taxes to a certain extent. Or is that group then allowed to advocate for those things with the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, Permit Sonoma, and address the problems that we have but are not traditionally addressed by that form of governance?
Yes, the leaders of the community services district can certainly advocate. They're just members of the public. They don't have any special authority, but hopefully the board would listen to them because they are elected locally. I do want to say that the community services district could be authorized to levy a tax if the voters wanted. You basically can't have a tax created or raised in California at the local level unless the voters approve it. So there's no way that the community services district board could raise your taxes, but you could say at the election, we want to have the capacity for tax increases, and the community could vote then or in a subsequent election for more taxes if they wanted more taxes for a higher level of services.
But they can't make changes to existing taxes like transient occupancy tax or the BIA.
No, that's right.
All right, my next question. Hi, thanks for working today too. We're all working today, I think. How do these different options that you presented affect the different ways that we can apply for grants, emergency funding from, for inclement weather, anything like that, from the federals and the state?
I mean, I think in general, it can only help. I haven't been directly involved with this, but I've heard from Supervisor Hopkins' staff that there are some grant funds that you struggle to apply for because there's no entity to receive the money. So creating an entity of local government, at least in theory, is a way to apply for and receive grant funds. I think it would depend on the specifics. If you create a park district, you probably can't apply for funding for houses. But as a general matter, if the community services district is providing a service for which the grant funds are made available, then you should be eligible for it.
And actually, I just want to add something really quickly, that public agencies are eligible for FEMA, for the public financing after a disaster. So just wanted to mention that as well. That would be true, I believe, of a community services district, as well as a water district, a sewer district, a city, or a county. Those are eligible entities if they suffered in a federally declared disaster, damage to their infrastructure.
Hi. So it sounds like a community service district would give us a level of autonomy that we sort of decide upon or vote for. And I was a little bit confused. You said that there would be an election to determine whether we wanted a community service district, or is it incorporation as well? Are all those questions asked at the same time? And also you said that we would then, at the same election, select members of the community service district or whatever. And then it would go to LAPCO for LAPCO to tell us whether or not we could actually do what we want to do. Is that what I heard?
All those elements are there, but we put them into the order in which they would happen. So the LAPCO process would be before the election. LAPCO has to say, this can work, basically. The financial analysis that you put together shows that you'll have enough money to deliver the services that you're planning to take responsibility for. So if they do that, then it goes to the ballot, and then the voters approve it and elect the board members to serve on, whether it's the city council or the community services board.
Is that at the same time or two separate elections?
No, these would be, only one thing would be voted on. You wouldn't have form a community services district or form a city. It would be one or the other.
So I'm talking about the committee and the community service district and the committee members.
Yeah, you would know at the time of the election that we're voting to create a CSD, and if it's created, I'm voting for Matt Newman to serve on the board. So that would happen at the same election.
Did you have a question?
Okay, and I do want to mention that we have a number of CSDs already in existence in West County. Trocadero has one, Occidental has one, and so does Green as well. And so it's also an opportunity. You were next, and I'm actually going to go.
Keep it track.
Thank you again, everybody. One of the things that I didn't hear too much in this was about neutrality. And I think a lot of people have been having conversations around this for a while. that seems to be the thing that's like creating a little bit of maybe animosity between this community and the county. And so I just wanted to get your guys' take on one, what is the viability of actually becoming or incorporating successfully based on the stuff that maybe a lot of people have heard about, no new cities formed in California since 2011 because of net neutrality. And two, how can this community start to think more collaboratively with the county around that so that we can actually see that as a viable option? Because I think right now we can say become incorporated if we vote, but there seems to be a lot more logistical and statewide hurdles to that. So just your perspective on that.
And actually, I'd like to jump in on this one. Number one, I actually don't think that there might be animosity between some parts of the county, and this community. But I would say that, like, I'm very keenly interested in advocating, as are at least two of my colleagues, as expressed at a public meeting, in actually advocating to have that state law changed to facilitate incorporation, particularly in disadvantaged communities that could really benefit from, sort of self-governance and self-representation. So I do want to mention that, state laws changed, and while it's been very difficult to incorporate since that state law was passed, that has not been the case, right, for all of California's history, and there is growing interest in some kind of an amendment that would facilitate incorporation. And actually, it is on the Board of Supervisors' agenda because it's coming forward as a recommendation from myself and Susan Warren. We serve on an unincorporated governance ad hoc, and one of our recommendations is to add it to our legislative platform that we would like to see the state change that law. So I want to mention that and then hand it back over to Matt, and if you have any follow-up on that one.
Yeah, so really good questions, and just a tiny bit of history on incorporation. So what happened before 2011 that the legislature was trying to change is that sometimes a new community would say, we want to form a city, and oh, by the way, we want, these houses over here, that's us, and we want that mall over there that's generating all that sales tax revenue. They kind of scoop it up, and they take all the money that was, the entities that were generating all the revenue, and they say, well, that poor community over there, we don't want them. And so people would kind of cherry pick, and the counties would end up without the money that they needed to provide services to the rest of the community. And in this process, we've really been focusing on kind of how lousy a job the counties do in providing services, right? But mostly what the county does isn't provide roads or parks or other things like that. They do those things, but mostly they provide health and social services to people who can't afford it and need help. And that's kind of the core mission, or one of the parts of the core mission of counties. And so counties advocated for a law change to say when a new city forms, it has to be revenue neutral. The city can't take away more revenue than it's taking away in service cost savings. So that was a thing that was done because the process was perceived to be unfair to the counties who were trying to serve the rest of their constituents. So the legislature said, okay, it has to be revenue neutral. If you're lowering service costs for us, great, you can have that money for the new community. The most important thing, though, that happened in 2011, which prevented new cities from being formed, is that new cities used to get a little extra money for a transition period of, I think, 5 or 7 years from the vehicle licensing, the car registration tax, because the legislature recognized that when you form a new city, you're providing all these services that the county used to provide, but you also have to get a city hall, hire a city attorney and a city manager, buy insurance and get an accountant and do all these things that added costs that the community wasn't having to pay for. And they knew that cost money, and they said, we're going to help you get there. And you also have to build up reserves, right? Because if you're a new city on day one and you have all the service responsibility, and then on day 2 there's a flood, well, what do? So you need some reserves. And so there used to be a mechanism, a law, to allow that to happen, and that went away, and the legislature hasn't figured out how to fix that yet. But that's probably the fix that would make it easier for a new city to form. I don't think we get rid of revenue neutrality. I don't know the crystal ball, but I don't think so. But I do think it's possible that the legislature would say, let's give new cities a little extra money so it's possible for one to form. Now, the other part of your question was, what would the revenue neutrality negotiation look like, right? Like, there is an argument to be made that, let's say this community wants to take over roads. You could say, well, how much have you spent on roads? Okay, we'll take that much. But what if the county's been systematically underinvesting in roads for 20 years? You might say, well, that's not fair. You're giving us this cruddy infrastructure and a little tiny bit of money and saying, okay, go ahead. well, that might not be fair. So it's at least in theory possible to negotiate with the county for perhaps a little more than they're currently spending. Call it revenue neutral because it's paying for a past underinvestment. And again, that's subject to a negotiation kind of mediated by the LAFCO with the county. Now, whether that's possible or not, I don't know. Remember, this is a community of 11 or 12,000 people. There's 500,000 people in this county. The other board members have their own constituents to think about. So they may not be willing to give up more than they absolutely have to. But something like that is at least in theory possible.
Great. I guess my follow-up question to that is just like, this is very helpful information because this will take an immense amount of work and time from this community to decide if we do want to incorporate. And I just want to hear from your guys' perspective, if incorporation is possible with revenue neutrality in place, or if we need to think about maybe as a community working to change that and then figuring out how to incorporate it. It represents a lot of work and I really want this pre-existing regulation that doesn't have anything to do with our desire to incorporate to ultimately be the reason to say no. So yeah, just your perspective on it, it's actually possible right now.
I do think that it is possible, although challenging. And the reason that I would say is exactly what Matt said about sort of proving the disinvestment and underinvestment in the community. And the example that I would look to is actually very similar to what Matt described about how, a city would cherry pick the rich areas and then leave the sort of, potentially socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhood. And that's exactly what we saw the city of Santa Rosa do with Roseland and Moreland. They took in Auto Row, hey, lots of sales tax from sales of cars, right? And then they left, working class families in these unincorporated islands surrounded by the city. And so when my predecessor really worked on the annexation of Roseland, it came at a hefty cost to the county, where the county actually had to pay for that systematic disinvestment and pay millions and millions of dollars to upgrade the infrastructure to get it to city standards prior to the city of Santa Rosa agreeing to take it on. So that's sort of a precedent that we can potentially look to. I would also let you know that my colleague out in East County, Susan Warren, is starting to have very serious conversations with the city of Sonoma about annexation of the Springs. That would also be a very similar situation with a disinvested in community, right, that's going to need upgrades in order to come up to city standards. So I would say very uphill battle. Not impossible, and I would say that it's probably a yes and. It's probably let's advocate for the state law and let's explore this if that is what the community decides that it wants. Again.
Thank you.
All right.
Just to reiterate one more point, the process for forming a community services district and a city are really the same or very similar all along until you get pretty close to the end. So you don't even have to pick a camp right now. You could be in favor of more local governance and more local control, but agnostic about which one is going to work and decide maybe the law gets changed. This process might take, I don't know, say it takes a couple years. Maybe the laws change and everyone says, oh, now incorporation, that looks a lot better. Or maybe the law doesn't change and you decide to go the CSD route for now and then incorporate later if and when the law changes. So you don't have to pick a camp right now.
Hi. I saw that in the community service district, one of the options was to do tours and promotion. If the community service district was formed and decided to do tours and promotion, is that like a self-governing they decide, or does that have to be approved by the county? That's part one of the question. Part two is if that was done, does that divorce us from Sonoma County Tourism, the entity, or can we still play that finish?
Yes. So what it means is that the county does some amount of tourism promotion now, and it uses the hotel tax as part of the funding source for that. If you formed a community services district or a special district that only did that, you could negotiate with the county to say, we want to do this for the Lower Russian River, and we want the money that you've been spending on the Lower Russian River or a fair share of the countywide pool to spend as we see fit. Now, you could also do some of it. You could say, we want half the money and half of it is Sonoma County wide, and we want you to keep doing that. And so any of those options is available. It just depends on what specific services the new district provides and what the negotiation with Sonoma County results in terms of how much they keep doing and how much the new entity do.
And then if it was decided not to form a community service district, but something as a special district, could that also be done as for tourism promotion here, under the special district, community service district wasn't on the community?
Yes, you could have a single purpose district that only did one thing like that.
Yeah, and worth noting that Sonoma County Tourism has two sources of funding. One is the BIA, that's sort of, essentially a pass-through that goes straight to them. And the other is they do currently get a % overall of TOT from the County of Sonoma. And I did actually look into forming, you could create either a BIA or a BID, Business Improvement District, and that's something that's open to, either sort of sectors. So you could do like a TOT that's sort of hospitality sector or community specific, like a downtown improvement kind of a corridor like they have. I don't know if they have it again. They used to have it in Santa Rosa, then it went away. It might be back now. And then also downtown Sebastopol has one as well. So you're going to add now, you seem like you have.
Yeah, I can actually walk through afterwards as well, that we deal with the Sonoma County, sorry. I'm president of the chamber, and we actually, deal with Sonoma County Tourism, as a new, entity working with us. They distribute the funds from the TOT tax, after voting and all this work done to the different chambers. And so I don't think that would change if we were to do any different service, area. And I can tell you exactly about how it works, what we got and all that.
All right, I'm gonna go back here. Okay, all right, actually, thank you so much. We've got a question from a Spanish-speaking member of our community.
Como un distrito especial puede ayudar a nuestra comunidad latina y también contribuye con impuestos, con taxes.
So,
Okay, so how can a special district help our Latina community that also contributes with taxes? No?
That's an excellent question. Do you want to take it, Matt, or do you want me to take a stab at it?
Either way.
Well, I will start by saying that, one of the things we've been working on in our office is trying to increase language access at meetings. And so, if you were to form a community services district, I personally think that it would be very important to engage with the Spanish-speaking community, to encourage members of the community to run for office, and then also to ensure that there were translation services available at meetings. And I think that also by having local meetings, right? One of the challenges about the county is that all of our meetings take place on Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. in Santa Rosa. That is not acceptable for folks who live in West County. And so community services districts often meet at night on a weekday, more accessible time frame, and they also meet locally in the community. And so I think that one benefit could be improved access to local community, representatives, and also potentially having community representatives that are more diverse from the community.
I think you said it well. That's exactly why you form local government, is to have more local representation and serve the local community better. So I think it would exactly help with that kind of thing.
Because there's one of me, but there would be 5 members of the community services district. All right, and I'm going to do just a couple more from this side and then switch to the other side, because I feel like you all are out in the sort of ice zone over there. You left 2 in Antarctica, but I'm coming. So 2 more over here and then switch side.
I should have asked this question, I think, earlier, just to make sure I'm coming back and forth with the suggestion of the city special district. We are talking about how many communities within this what's called the Lower Russian River area? 15, 16 different, I don't know what the number is, but we have to remember that we're talking about making a city out of the entire area, not necessarily making a city for Guerneville and a city for Forestville. We could do that reasonably, but this discussion is about making the entire area special district for the entire area a city. Is that correct?
I think the discussion is about whatever the community wants. There's no decision that's been made. Our financial analysis looked at the whole region together. I do think that there's only about 11 or 12,000 people in the whole region, so forming a city much smaller than that would probably make it even harder to succeed financially. But there's no legal limitation to prevent it. There's no reason one of these communities couldn't say, we want to be part of it or not part of it and, do their own thing. So these are all possible, but practically speaking, I think a city would have to have at least a certain minimum size. One distinction though is a city provides all the services a city provides. So they're responsible for police and roads and parks and if it's not already provided by someone else, water and wastewater. They do everything, animal control, community services district, and that would therefore mean that they provide those services to the whole region. But a community services district could do a subset, and maybe the whole region wants better law enforcement, and that's uniform, but they don't really want a difference in the way roads are done, or a difference in the way parks are done. So there's more flexibility with the community services district because it could only provide a subset of the services, whereas the city is legally responsible for providing all the services to its residents.
Yeah, and I would just say that we really didn't get to the mapping stage with this. That would be part of the next phase, would be really sort of, drawing that map and considering that. Right, was there anyone who I missed rather than forever before? Okay, and then I'm gonna come over to Antarctica and promise your name.
Thank you so much. So let's say that the implementation of the governance is successful, the one that you're suggesting, not a full-on city structure. What are your suggestions about what's going to be success? I mean, what is the community going to provide to be successful in the county? How are they going to help us to ensure that the governance is going to be, I mean, what I'm trying to say is like, we get to elect all these people. What are the tools that the community has to ensure the success of this first stage? You said 2 years it's going to take to implement for the implementation of this. What do you know? Because you have the experience, you said you have done this with many other places. What is the history of success for us to implement something like this?
Well, there's lots and lots of examples of communities that form a special district or form a community services district. And prior to 2011, lots of communities form new cities. So there's lots and lots of examples of success. And there's not very many examples of a local government going bankrupt or something like that. Those are certainly the very rare cases. So I think there's reason to be hopeful that something like this could work. The way for the 2 years that really depends on how quickly this community decided it wants to move. It could be faster, it could be slower. I think that the way to ensure success is to elect people that are dedicated to the community and capable of providing services and managing the new district. That's the quality of the local leadership will be the most important thing in determining the success of the new special district. And so that, I would say, very important to make sure that you're voting for people who you think can do a great job.
Right. I guess the tools I'm talking about is for the community to have the knowledge how to elect the best people that we need. And so we don't just go blindfolded. It's like, oh, we're going to elect people. We need tools to be able to learn about, what this structure is going to be and fervently believe on what these people's, best interests are that we electing, the people that we're electing. So what are the tools that the county has for us?
So that's probably a question that I could ask in terms of the question of really what are the tools that the county has for us. So number one, the local agency formation commission is going to need to be a resource in this process. And they do what's called an MSR or a municipal services review, which would be kind of the first step. And you would really want to, work with them in terms of drawing potential boundaries. The other thing that I think is really important in order to succeed, totally agree with everything that Matt said, is that we need 3 votes at the end of the day on the Board of Supervisors, right? If East County is going through a parallel process, that's great, because we've got a partner, we've got alignment, that's potentially a vote, right? You're, sort of supporting similar initiatives. We would need one more. So it's really good, for members of the community, because I can only ever talk to one other board member, to reach out to all of the members of the board early on in the process to gauge their interest, and potentially also to work with other municipal advisory councils and community services districts in other districts, supervisorial districts, right? So they can then also advocate to their supervisor. Because at the end of the day, it will be a budgetary decision. Typically, a budgetary decision needs a 4/5 vote outside of budget hearings. If it's in budget hearings, it would be a 3/5 vote. But at the end of the day, we need a couple of my colleagues to jump on board this train. And so it would be good to check in with them, really. But our office will also serve as a resource. We're willing to meet with any group that forms out of this process to talk about what the next steps are. So we will continue to work with you.
And one more thing, there's an entity called the California Special Districts Association, which is just an association of all the special districts in the state. And they have a local representative who can help a community thinking of forming a new special district and be a resource to this community as they go through that process. So that is another resource available.
Buenas tardes. Yo no entiendo mucho de finanzas y esas cosas del dinero, pero ¿qué pasa si en vez de pensar en hacer una ciudad y todo eso que tarda más tiempo, no podrían ahorita con el dinero que el Estado les da o que el gobierno les da, tratar de arreglar las carreteras de este pueblo, tratar de arreglar algo para los jóvenes como el gimnasio juvenil mi pregunta es ¿por qué tener que pensar en hacer una ciudad pudiendo mejor arreglar nuestro pueblito, las carreteras y todo lo que nos hace falta? Gracias.
Good afternoon. I am not very knowledgeable in finances and things like that, but I was thinking, so why instead of thinking about creating a city or an organization, an institution, can we, I guess my question is, can we work on our streets? Can we work in a community center for the youth instead of creating a new process? Is that feasible?
That is a great question. And I will say that regardless of what comes out of this process, if there are folks who want to create a community services district or a city or a council of governments, we will absolutely work with you to form a community center for the youth and to address some of the concerns about the street. And actually, I can share, this is probably a little preliminary, but our 5th district team met yesterday to discuss one-time funding that we have. And we have tentatively agreed to allocate $750,000 to community projects in Guerneville, including hoping to start, support the youth community center process, looking at the downtown plaza, potentially investments in Riverfront Park and other needs. So we're going to be working with the community, and Lupe and Shay will both be working on those projects to try to identify those. We're not going to stop on those. We're going to keep going as much as we can. Do you have a follow-up question?
Una de las cosas es porque a mí tengo 14 años aquí, me encanta el pueblo. También uno de los centros juveniles que está ayudando es el gimnasio juvenil de Youth. Entonces yo creo que podían trabajar en eso, hacer más grande el gimnasio. Y a mí me encanta el pueblo, no creo que necesite una ciudad. No sé, es bonito el pueblo de Guadalupe. Gracias.
Yes, another thing, I've been living here for 14 years in the city. I love my city. Very beautiful. The other option would be the Knowles Gymnasium for kids. And, I don't think we need to create a new city to work on a project like that.
I would say I agree. We're going to work on those projects, regardless of whether we decide to go with the community services district or a city or not. We really look forward to working with you, and thank you so much for your question and for your feedback. All right, with this one.
Hi, I have a question about the cost of doing CSD. Now you're talking about 5 people, do they get paid, lawyers, staff, rooms, where's that money coming from? Where's he gonna take it away from? How do you even get there?
One thing that, so I am not aware of any community services districts locally that pay their elected officials really anything other than potentially a very small stipend. And so it would be really great, I think, as part of this process to check in with, Cazadero and Brayton and Occidental. Most of them do not have attorneys present at every meeting like we do at the Board of Supervisors. They often meet in community space, at a firehouse or at the Russian River, health center over there, that community room. So they, like most small governments, just kind of go on a shoestring budget, and all the revenue that comes in really goes back out into community projects and staff, from what I've seen at these small districts. So I'm seeing our administrator of our local parks district nodding, so. All right.
So I guess that's one quick follow-up to that is that I think everything Supervisor Hopkins said is absolutely right. A kind of corollary to that is the sort of bigger the entity, the more services it provides, and the bigger the territory, the more there's economies of scale. Right? You still have to file a financial report with the state. That's not a hugely expensive thing, but it costs some amount of money. It's one per district, so if the district is consolidated with an existing district, for example, that cost is the same, but the district got bigger. So that's worth thinking about. If you're talking about a really micro district, it might not work, but a slightly bigger one could work a little better.
Hi, so a couple questions. One is, can we expand the boundaries of an existing community service district to include, for example, Brayton's Community Service District to expand to include Forestville, if that's what the community wants to do? Is that possible? And then the other question is, do we get support from LAFCO to put something on the ballot, like add an assessment to help support that greater community service district? How does it get on the ballot? Thank you.
How about I take the first one, you take the second one? So the first one is absolutely, you can look at annexation of territories from an existing community services district, just like you could with an existing rec and park district or water district. You can also look at consolidations, right, where you bring two together and potentially tack on additional sort of properties. And there's a whole formal LAFCO process for that that includes opportunities for a protest vote, and hearings before the LAFCO commission as well.
And in terms of putting something on the ballot, again, it would be just like the process of forming a district. You have to have an election, and the county would run the election, and the voters would get to vote in the annexed territory to decide, yes, we want to be part of this district, and if there's a financial implication to vote to approve that.
So is there just, like, would I go out and collect votes and put it on the ballot, or does LAFCO have some ability to support us in the cost of printing, all that?
I mean, an application has to be filed with the LAFCO, and then you'll engage with the LAFCO about the process. I actually don't know who pays for the election. But we can look at it and figure it out.
Yeah, we can definitely look that up. I'm not sure if it's the county or the entity that is asking to be formed and paid back the county for the election. That's likely the case, but we can find that out and get back to you.
Yeah, I'd like to know about Council of Governments. If we put all those folks together, do they have any actual power? Do they just become an advisory committee to the county?
Can they apply for federal grants and state grants and county grants and different things to actually spend money? Or are they strictly just?
It would be strictly advisory. They could form a nonprofit entity or something called a joint powers authority, which in theory could do that, but that would be a sort of second, more formal step. At least initially, it would just be people getting together and talking about mutual needs.
I've got a couple of questions in writing. One, can a CSD cast a net over TOT revenues and control how the TOT dollars are spent?
Kind of. What would have to happen is that the new district would have to say, we're taking over these services, and in exchange for that, we want this revenue stream to pay for it. So that is a theoretical possibility, but the only way to actually take all the TOT is to be a city. That doesn't mean it's more financially advantageous, because remember, there's still a revenue neutrality negotiation, but what would happen is the city would be authorized to collect a TOT within its boundaries, and then that TOT would generate revenue to pay for municipal services, but there could be a revenue neutrality payment that would have to be made back to the county to provide all the countywide services that we talked about before. One important distinction, though, is that in that case, and this is an important thing to think about for incorporation, one of the ways that they can work is if there's an increase in revenue expected in the future, or that it happens in the future. So if a community is expecting a lot of growth or wants to have a lot of growth, it will have control over land use. It will have control over how much growth there is. That growth can generate additional revenue, which helps make the city more viable. Now, conversely, if the community doesn't want that growth, it makes it more difficult to succeed financially because the revenue streams are not growing as quickly. So that's a thing to keep in mind when you're talking about forming a city. More control over your destiny, growth helps generate more revenue, but it may or may not be able to be reports.
I was wondering if the study considered a path towards perhaps adding a second representative on the Board of Supervisors, if that is feasible, or if there's community interest in that, given how much land we represent. And would that help having an additional representative with moving forward with any of these suggestions, like for instance, a Russian River North and a Russian River South representative, so that we kind of always have an ally, just given that we tend to struggle with a lot of the same issues across this large expanse of space. That's a really good question, and I feel like actually the last person I had this conversation with was John Kubiak, who I believe was talking with me about, why don't we have 7 or 9 people on the Board of Supervisors so that we would have more individual community representation and also more rural representation. Because as it is, we have 3 supervisors who are, pretty much totally urban districts, right? And so it's very difficult to raise the issues of unincorporated areas. There aren't too many counties in the state of California who have more than 5. San Francisco is the only one that I can think of. I don't know if Matt, if you can think of any other examples. And they're a city and a county, so they're sort of special among counties. But that would be, I think, a much bigger conversation. And I don't believe that was something that Matt considered, but you can that.
I'm not aware of another county with more than 5. It is possible. I think there was a ballot initiative in Los Angeles to expand the board there, or at least an effort to try to get something on the ballot, but that didn't happen. It is technically feasible. It's not something that we spent time looking at, though.
I do have one other written question, which is what happened to scaling back the number of exclusions for vacation rentals in riverfront areas in Guerneville, and how much are we going to lose financially as vacation rentals get sold and they cannot be permitted again? This is a good question, sort of a little bit tangential to this discussion, but also important when you think about the future revenue of the area. I fought very hard to bring vacation rentals back and to have a more nuanced approach, and unfortunately, that also led to unintended consequences of banning vacation rental in expensive riverfront property that have always been vacation rental areas. So I did advocate for vacation rental inclusion zones in areas that everyone can agree are okay for vacation rentals. That was supposed to happen 2 summers ago, then it was supposed to happen last summer, and then now it is supposed to be wrapped into the general plan update process. So this is part of the challenge with county government is so many priorities and countywide priorities, and all of our timeline from permit to NOMA seem to slip and to extend and to go forward. So that is the update on that. I will let you know if I hear anything. We are doing the general plan update process this year, and we'll be having local community meetings, so stay tuned on our community newsletter. And sorry, do you have any questions, follow up? Great. Coming back. The rest of Antarctica.
I wrote my question down because it's a little bit long. Regarding wastewater treatment, we have a highly technical service with many complex regulations. Water agency never has enough money from fees, which are second highest in the county.
Can you speak louder to the translators, please, so just put a little closer to you?
Too much deferred maintenance now has resulted in a study that calls for $47 million in repairs are needed for the collection system for Kernville. The improvements are needed. Many of these improvements are urgently needed. They have to be done yesterday. There's not nearly enough money to keep current with needed upkeep. Long history of system failures have resulted in major penalties and more to come. Furthermore, penalty cannot be used to fund repairs. The current penalty is over $1 million, but permit failures could have resulted in $9 million. Our small community does not have enough resources to oversee this service. The county can't even deal with it now, or has been having a lot of problems with it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could stand up here for a long time talking about it. So, whatever we do, we don't want to take over the.
You actually stole my line. After hearing that, exactly what I was saying, like, you guys probably don't want to take over the sewer district. And yeah, you said it. And I mean, that also speaks to a larger challenge, which is, you know, when you have a limited repair base, right, and regulations that change and aging infrastructure, you know, what do we do? And so that's definitely something where I would say if we're negotiating revenue neutrality, well, clearly, you know, we have not put in the money that we need to upkeep that system adequately. And that would need to be sort of a subject of negotiation. Either you don't take on the sanitation district, or there are upgrades that need to be made prior to you assuming that liability. All right, we're going to take just a couple more questions. So I see 2 hands up, and then we really want to shift over to comments to make sure that we have time for folks to just speak their mind and for you to potentially identify like-minded individual who might want to follow up with after this meeting. So I do one here, one there, and then one third. Great. Do you have something?
Okay, can everyone hear me? I just want to say thank you to everybody who has put the effort into making this study happen. All the volunteers, it's not just the county that has done it, there have been volunteers in our community that are trying to make a difference, and that's why this study is happening. So I just want to put that out there, thank you. I 100% agree with Brenda. If anybody knows me, they know I've had hands-on experience with our sewer district, and it needs a lot of repairs. But I have a lot of questions in regards to the study, but I have come today to focus on revenue. I have my history and what I have done. I've worked in this community for a very long time. I have seen millions of dollars of TOT, and now we have a BIA going out of our district. It is my understanding that the only way we can keep this money in our district is if we incorporate it. I know there are a lot of issues. I know that we're all concerned, but I think the only way that we're gonna be able to make a difference in our community is by using some of this TOT money. So I'm asking from the study, because I've done my own research to find out what TOT is, and I don't understand, and this might be, there's a gray area in my understanding with where the Airbnb is giving the TOT to the county, because there's really not a definition of how much is coming into our incorporated area that we're trying to make is the Lower Russian River. I was gonna ask a question, if you did have a map, if you could put that up there, because I was had a really hard time. I think I need glasses, but I really had a hard time reading the map to understand where the definition of this area is going to be. So I think that's a big part of this. My question is, where did this $6 million come from? Because when I'm looking at the Sonoma County tourism website and I'm looking at the TOT that's coming in, the unincorporated TOT that's coming in for this time frame, this fiscal year that you guys are incorporating in the study is $30,240,319. So I took that and then I divided it by what we were giving up, which is $6 million. And so that means that 20% of the unincorporated total is elsewhere. I mean, I'm just not understanding how these numbers are making sense. And I would like to see the data to support this. And also in regards to the property taxes as well, I feel like, I'm not sure where this data is coming from. It's my understanding that the county of Sonoma is very behind in collecting property taxes and billing people. So I also feel that that revenue.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Here's the sign. I don't think, so this is my question, I'm a number person. I want to see where these numbers are coming from, and then let's look at the expenses. But I'd like to focus on the revenue first, because I believe that our district is to be able to create more TNT and more property tax money. And the other question I have also, or thing I want to just put out there as an idea, this is a comment, perhaps early today, I'm sorry, but I want to know, why can't we raise our sales tax? Do you guys know that we're unincorporated out here? We pay a sales tax compared to Sonoma County. Do you realize that when you shop in Sebastopol, you're paying like 1.5% more sales tax? So, I mean, that could be another revenue source that nobody's talking about. Just up it like 0.25%. Make it like, make it similar to other stuff. So I just would like to understand, I guess, my biggest point is for you, since I have your attention, is where are you getting the TOT numbers? And how do you know that those are correct?
So there's two parts of the TOT. One is the non-Airbnb share, and those are every person who's registered with the county to be able to have a legal vacation rental has to report to the county how much revenue they collected and they pay the TOT. So we know that at the address level. And so the county is able to run a report that they sent to us and we reviewed. It says, here's the actual TOT from non-Airbnb in the region that we defined as.
Up a bit, please.
Yeah, so there's two parts of the TOT. The first is the non-Airbnb share. So if you're not renting through Airbnb, you have to you have to be approved by the county to be a legal vacation rental, and then you pay taxes to the county, and that's at the address level. So we know exactly how much was collected from every entity in the county that does vacation rental. So I don't think a lot of uncertainty about that. Now, Airbnb is very, I don't know what the right metaphor is. They don't share their data very well with this community or other communities, and they report to the county in a lump sum how much revenue they collected from all of unincorporated Sonoma County for TOT. And so we had to make an estimate about the share that comes from here versus the share that goes elsewhere. And so to do that, we assumed that the ratio of non-Airbnb revenue was the same. So if this region generates 20% of the non-Airbnb revenue, we estimated it also generates 20% of the Airbnb revenue. That's the only basis that we have. So it's not certain, but I worked with the county finance people and my own team to come up with the best estimate that we could, which is what's shown.
And the solution to that is, trying to petition Airbnb for better information, because they actually do provide more information in some jurisdictions. They don't like to do it, but some jurisdictions actually have been able to negotiate more effectively with them. You also mentioned sales tax, which I want to address. which is that if we were to just incorporate, or if we were just to add additional sales tax in unincorporated areas, it would all go into the county's general fund. If you wanted to keep an increase in sales tax, you would have to form sort of your own district or your own city in order to do so. But that is possible. Oh, and there was also a request for a map, so there is a map up here. And just a reminder, we didn't get into the details about the map. The map is sort of the next phase in terms of drawing. We were just looking at this area broadly so that we could kind of have a conversation about what's appropriate. And there was another question over here.
Thank you. This is an actual question. It's back to the sanitation district, and we have and governance. And we have a sanitation district that is part of the Sonoma County Water, that is governed by the Sonoma County Water Agency, and the board of directors is our supervisors. Well, is it possible, would it be possible, as part of our governance, to put into effect a board of directors that's local for the sanitation district? Sweetwater Springs has a board of directors. Might have died. Can we get our own local board of directors for the sanitation district? It is actually a special district. How would we do that? Can we do that? Do we have to go through a community services district, or can we just do that? Is that something we could do?
That's a great question. And, one model that I think of is that in Bodega Bay, we have the Spud Point Marina Advisory Committee that helps to advise the board on financial decisions and to provide that kind of local voice that meets in Bodega Bay on a monthly basis with regional park staff. Something like that might be an opportunity. And it also might be something that we want to take to the CAG, who's been working on these kinds of issues, and have that conversation. The CAG is the Citizens Advisory Group that has been formed to help us implement the rules that are coming down from the Regional Water Board regarding the Russian River total maximum daily load, trying to address pathogens and contaminants on the river. So a lot of bureaucratic in that statement, sorry, but I think that's a very interesting idea to explore. And in line with the sort of Council of Governments, CSD, how do we get greater oversight over that? So we'd love to follow up with you on that. And participation. And I'm going to switch over to comments. If folks want to also ask a question as part of their comment, that is okay. I do have one more question on a card. The biggest hurdle challenge in forming a CSD is increasing taxes. What percent would that look like? Many against increase in property tax. And yet I hear that as well. My understanding is that first you sort of vote to, create the CSD, that, if there is any potential for raising taxes, that would also then have to go to a future vote. Is that correct, Matt?
There's no tax increase without a vote. That's true. You could vote to create a CSD and a new tax at the same time, or you could vote to create a CSD, maintain the existing level of services, that is the existing amount of revenue, and then in the future vote for a tax increase.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over here, and then I'm going to start sort of going around. And this is just, hey, voice your opinion, ask a question if you want to, and I'll try to popcorn around the room.
I just read a report by Brian Hughes, who actually paid $1,000 out of his pocket to see what the TOT was for this county, to see what the actual TOT was for this area. And they went directly to Airbnb and got all the figures and et cetera. And they came up with that the county collects something like around $48 million. And for the unincorporated area, it collects around $22 million. So there is some money there for us. I also understand that the LAFCO head is sort of antithetical to forming cities and doing all this stuff. So how do we get around that would be a big question.
the head of LAFCO does report to a board, so a commission. And so ultimately it is the commissioners and not the executive officer who makes the decision. We actually have a commissioner, if it's okay to out him here. Rich Holmer serves on LAFCO. A couple of my colleagues serve on LAFCO as well. I have also served on LAFCO in the past, but I actually stepped off because then I can lobby everybody on the board. When I'm on the board, I can't. So if there's an issue that relates to West County, it actually enables me to talk to more commissioners and to sort of make my case when I'm not on the board. So I'm gonna go to John.
Thank you. John Maniac, been on multiple local boards in this area. What I didn't hear is that when was the last time the city was incorporated in California? And when was the last time the city under 10,000 people has been incorporated? This is a pipe dream that is way out there in left field. I was told at the time that this population would not be able to incorporate now. So would you like to address that? Thank you.
Do you want to share the history on incorporation?
The last time a city incorporated was 2011. I don't know the last time a city of around 10,000 people incorporated, but it's something we can look at. Whether it's a pipe dream or not, I guess I don't know how to say, except that it's quite difficult without a change in the law, but feasible if that were to happen.
All right, other hands, I'll go here and then I'll run back there.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the fellow citizen over there who brought up Brian Hughes. He not only provided that information, but he also provided a rebuttal to this report, along with a frequently asked question, multiple page thing. And yesterday there was a lot of social media coverage going on about this, and I think he was really trying to educate the community a lot more during this back and forth. So there is documentation available to provide everybody more education about the finance and all of that.
Where is the document? Where is it?
The question is where, and we can definitely follow up on. So there's some information on social media, yeah, and we can definitely share.
Mitch to Linda's office.
All right, I come over here and then I'll be back.
I guess my question about being incorporated or being a city is that we have exemptions with our vehicles out here in West County. Nobody has to smog their vehicles. And I think that that is one thing to keep in mind when you're being incorporated. And
that's a really good question. And so that is actually separate. That is because we up here are in the Northern Sonoma County Air Pollution Control District, which is currently in attainment with all of the federal laws about air quality. Folks who live in Sebastopol and basically Windsor and South are in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which is not in attainment. And so if you live in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, you do have to smog your car every year. And in North Sonoma County, you don't. Also in North Sonoma County, controlled burns are easier to do. It's harder in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. That would not change as a result of incorporation, but I serve on both of those boards, and there is currently a conversation about should the Northern Sonoma County Air Pollution Control District actually go to expand and cover all of Sonoma County, just to make some of these things more consistent and prescribed air. That would again bring Northern Sonoma County into Southern Sonoma County, not the other way around, which is where you would see those increased regulations. So but really good question. All right, let's see. Oh yeah, I promised. Oh, Rich and then Dan.
We're on comments, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've heard a lot of great ideas about what might be able to be done. I think they're pretty well thought out, and obviously they need to be furnished and strengthened, but I think the question is, how do we get there? How do we make a decision? And, there's a diversity of interests, there's a diversity of areas, and somehow we need to bring collective thinking about what are we going to do, how big is it going to be, and do we all really want to do it or not? So we need a group that represents all the various interests that are represented here today. There's also cost involved in this process. Filing of LAFCO requires that you have a description, a legal description of the district boundaries or whatever we form. That's expensive. There might also be a municipal service review, there could be expenses associated with that. And then there's finally a filing fee. So in order to get this going, there needs to be seed money. And people have to figure out where that money's coming from, whether the county will help us, whether we go out and sell cookies, whatever. So I've been sitting here thinking, and boy, it seems like the MAC would be a good vehicle for that. Just because they represent all the areas and the diversity of interests. So I just wanted to put that thought out. Thank you.
Well, we can ask the chair of the MAC if we can get that scheduled on a future agenda. And with respect to the seed money, I do want to say that I would absolutely go to bat for county funding for this effort for the different sort of fees that you've described. Do you want to say anything before I go back to Dan Pine about the MAC, the role of the MAC?
We'll definitely think about it.
Agenda, you can talk about agenda.
I can't comment because there's a form of the bank. That's why I'm not talking. But I can talk about it. We will definitely put this on agenda in the meeting. And my name is Martin Silvana. I'm the chair of the Rural Russian Bank. And I'm from the community.
And then back to Dan, and we'll come back up.
I'm currently the president of Mario Fire, and Mario Fire is currently talking, has an application in to join Gold Ridge's Sierra Vineyard. So we're in the process of consolidating the West County Fire District. Already the adjacent districts have pretty much joined up with Sonoma County Fire, so we're realigning fire services. I'm also the co-chair of the CAG, your wastewater study at the moment. But what it really is a study of how to deal with a service that every one of us uses 100% every day, everywhere. And so this is really an item that the county should be taking as a whole. We should be looking at this not as a wastewater problem, but as a water resource. That we should be thinking about how we keep that water in service, that we always have a supply of drinking water, that we're not using it up on things that we could be using other, treated water for. But in order to do this, we have to be thinking about it regionally. We're too small to have an individual wastewater service. We have to be thinking regionally, we have to be putting it together, and I think that would call for a county-wide district. The last thing I want to talk about is years ago, I was a member of the board of the redevelopment oversight committee, ROC. And the ROC is in place, and it's sort of like the MAX, because, but the difference is that the ROC had money to spend. We had a budget that was allocated to us, and we used it well. And there were a lot of good projects that came out of the ROC. It was a limited scope of things, and money came from the county and other districts, but we had local control over that, and it's very much like what you have now with the MAC. You could see a MAC with funding and a specific scope of projects could be very successful out here. And the last thing, the very last thing, is that anytime we talk about expanding the number of districts, you have to think about how you're going to actually manage it. We have vacancies on most boards out here because they're volunteer. We're too small to be looking at problems as a whole, and it's hard to get that much volunteer help at the board. So, thank you.
Tengo una pregunta muy importante, si me digan la mente ahorita.
yo no sé si están 100% seguros de querer construir una ciudad, ya que aquí estamos en un área donde se inunda mucho, estamos propensos a los incendios, entonces yo creo que no sería un pueblo inundado, sino una ciudad inundada como San Diego. No sé si sea una excelente idea ser parte de una ciudad si cada rato nos inundamos o nos estamos incendiando. Gracias.
So taking into account that we are a small town, that we are having trouble frequently with floods and also frequently with fires, well, if we become a city, then we would be a city with floods and fires. A city like San Diego that would be frequently flooding.
I think that's a really good point and something that I've heard from a few different community members. Cities are eligible for FEMA grants after disasters. However, FEMA grants are complicated to implement, and FEMA, actually from some cities, has clawed funding back after funding projects, just because they didn't dot their I's or cross their T's on the paperwork. So, good point, and I think that regardless of what Burnville and the Lower Russian River decides to do, it's going to take close collaboration with the county to address things like floods and fires, because that's really regional, beyond just even the potential boundaries of the city. Anyone else in the back here who wants to speak before I go to the front?
Just a very quick comment. I was just going to echo the comment that was made by a lady across this side earlier. That was just in relation to the representation. I think Linda obviously does a very, very good job advocating for us, but my understanding is roughly 100,000 residents per district. And so while it wasn't looked into in this study, I do think it's interesting to look at what would it look like if we had, twice the number of representatives. Linda obviously does a very good job. There's a great deal of resources and power in the county of Sonoma if we were to have stronger representation or closer representation without necessarily going all the way to corporation or a service district, whether that might be well into.
I would definitely support having fewer constituents and more rural colleagues on the board, just saying.
Good timing. Mine kind of piggybacks on that too. I also think it's important to remember as we think about the difference between community services district and full incorporation.
Could you speak up a little?
Yeah, of course. Sorry about that. I was just saying, as we think about the difference between community services district and incorporation, we also have to remember how hard that and her team work, because they are full-time, fully dedicated to this very, very complicated thing. Community services district will continue to be volunteers who can dedicate a certain amount of time to this, but it's not their primary thing. So just the human aspect of that makes it not the same kind of option. It's very apples to oranges. And then the last thing I'll say is I think overall in the meeting, we've been talking a lot about how local governments can solve things reactively. And I think that's important because all of these problems are things that we've had to react to. But I think if we think about the power of the corporation and being a fully autonomous city that has full representation, full-time folks, we can start to think about governance as something that looks at the future and starts to let our community decide what do we want this region to look like eventually, not just how do we solve the problems of right now, but what is the long-term plan that is right for this? How does the community that is here and or will be here and changes seasonally, how do they want this community to look like in the very long term? I don't think anything less than full incorporation gives us the ability to future cast as a community, which is really what successful governments should look. So let's not just look at reactive, let's be proactive too.
I do want to say that I think one of the biggest assets of being a city is having a city manager. You have someone who is full-time, just working for you, keeping an eye on what's happening regionally, funding sources, et cetera. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with representing a lot of unincorporated communities. We don't have that kind of level of resource, right? Where there is someone who is just full-time focused on just one town, right? And so that does enable them, especially if you have a city where you also hire a grant writer, for instance, to draw down a lot of state and federal resources. Not impossible with CFDs, and we're trying to work with some of our local agencies to bring them grant writing support from fire districts to, parks districts and stuff, but it still, takes a lot of coordination. All right, comments? We've got a few more minutes. Okay, so I see one.
I don't know if this is more of a comment or a question. We'll figure it out. Piggybacking on your comments is, can you, as a community service district, create a paid position? And then can the county still help with that at that point?
So community services districts do have employees, just like parks districts do, and then the funding kind of goes back to, right, the sort of revenue transfer questioning.
Yeah, CSD is an entity of local government, and if there's enough resources, it can hire many full-time staff, if there are resources to do so. In lots of communities where these multi-service CSDs exist, they function a lot like a city. They don't do the land use part, but they provide multiple services, and they have employees, and they have a CSD manager who does some of what a CSD does. It's smaller, so there's fewer resources, but it's sort of a mini city in certain respects.
All right, I saw a hand over here, I think, or was it you? All right, we'll do this round.
So this is kind of just like on a side note. I think that a lot of the community wants to get involved, but I think the promotion just for like these meetings in general are none. And I think a lot of people are not on social media, so it's really difficult to know that these things are even happening. This is a pretty good turnout, but I know there was like a post that kind of exploded on social media, so I know that's why I found out about it. So I'm wondering what a good solution would be to be able to promote this in a way that it could reach everybody.
I would say give us suggestions, because we try to do what we can. We send out press releases to all of our local news outlets. None of them picked it up. We post on social media. If you sign up for our email newsletter, that's really where we try to make sure that all of the information is there. So that's super important. We unfortunately don't have the budget to mail everybody, sort of hard copy invite. That's just super expensive, and we'd be spending our money on that instead of on the projects we want to get done in the community. But if you have any suggestions, we are all ears with how to get the word out, because it's something we really try, and we always hear folks, I didn't know it was happening.
So we moved to Gurnville from Forestville. I know Forestville papers the town and neon posters, and that does a pretty good job. So that would be something easy, I think, that we could take on. Maybe like 1 or 2 people. I could volunteer to do that even, just to make sure that everybody knows, because I think this concerns everyone, especially like the issues that are tangible and visible, the downtown area, the trash. So yeah, it'd be nice to put something like that forth.
We do have little handouts that have QR codes to sign up for the email newsletter. So anyone who's not signed up, we can get you signed up. And also, if any community groups are interested, it's actually Forestville residents who do that outreach for the Forestville Town Hall. So if there's anyone here who's willing to volunteer and work with us to help put up signs and flyers, we'd love to work with you. That's how it works in Forestville. All right, I think this one, this one is investment.
Yeah, so just following your question, I think the most likely largest forum to continue this discussion, which should continue, is probably we can't have meetings like this anymore, because Blue Sky's goal is ending. So I would like to see the MAC continue these discussions. I know Pitt probably said that it'll be on the agenda. But yeah, that's one good option. I mean,
And if anyone wants to help us flyer for the MAC meetings, please come see us after the meeting.
Basically, being informed is proactive. If you want to be informed, there's tons of ways to stay informed, and this newsletter is one of them, and social media is another one. And the county has websites where you sign up for specific topics that you're interested in, and they will send you emails on those specific topics. So it is a proactive approach to PATS, and volunteers are really what makes our communities operate, not paid people, volunteers. So one of the recommendations that come out of this document, this was an easy document to read, and it is online, and it's only 30 pages, but the recommendation was basically to strengthen additional existing institutions. And one of those is the MAC, and by giving the MAC a budget, which it doesn't have, and form a Lower River Council of Governments, which would also have a budget, then all those people become elected, and those are elected volunteers, which requires volunteers. So one of those things is, as he was noticing with the MAC, is that a lot of us started it 5 years ago, and some of us, like Lucy and I, have passed our positions on to people who have volunteered, who are younger, who have a future in our communities. As those of us who started it, I mean, just Dan, who's been on board since the beginning of time, a lot of people who are currently volunteering to run the unincorporated Lower River area are aging out and looking for young people to take over. Young people who have children in schools is one of the places all of us got involved just by being soccer moms and being on the school board and things like that. As we age and as our communities are encouraging more young people to move here, as we have noticed in our community events, we're seeing tons of young families. And one of the reasons why we're seeing them, and these are kids that aren't even school age yet, is because we do offer affordable housing in the Lower Russian River area if you have a few skills around fixing the house that you are taking over. And that has always been the case because it has been a vacation community. So there are all these second homes and cabins like I bought 34 years ago. As a single mother, self-employed, I begged to get that thing. So I'm still living here 34 years later, and now I am passing the baton on to the two younger people who have taken over for Forestville on the Lower River MAC. And I recommend that young people with families who move here become proactive and volunteer and even follow the recommendations of what this report has said to strengthen existing services and institutions, the MAC being the start, and then move on to the next one and the next one slowly over time. When you look at the budget they put together, just law enforcement alone for the Lower River area is $5 million. That's astonishing when you just take the sections of the budget and say, that's ours, $5 million. Okay, let's approach this slowly, carefully. Let's start with the MAC. It's a great institution and it's finally getting its feet firmly planted on the ground, and we now know what we're doing. Thank you.
And on that note, our time has come to an end. You are welcome to fill out comment cards if you didn't get a chance to talk, or come up and talk to any one of me or our Austin Fifth District team members afterward. And please come up and say, hey, I want a meeting. When's the next opening in your calendar? I'd love to get together with you people. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great weekend. Take care.
We haven't updated the flyers, so it's the yeah. But we realize we need to update it.
I got a comment?
Yeah, can you stick in your pocket? That's really not something that I thought would be too appropriate for this. Thank you for all your work.
Email address or anything.
Yeah, put it on there.
That's great, wonderful.